Podcasting from the Lone Star State in Southern California, you're listening to the Coma Podcast with Cody and Matt.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Coma Cast. This is May 31st, Monday. We want to just do like a special episode talking about the Tulsa Massacre. Now, we previously had talked about this, and we're going to play that portion where Matt talks about the history of it and what actually happened that day. But this weekend, Matt, actually marks like the 100th anniversary of this thing. And we actually just talked about it on last night's show, I believe, where you were talking about a neighbor who didn't even know about this.
Right, and she and her mother grew up here in the South, and in the grand scheme of the country, I'm not terribly far from that area. I think I live about 7 hours from there. And my neighbor and her mom, both Black women, obviously, she had no idea. She was literally talking to me in my front yard the other day. We were just chatting, and she was telling me about some things she had learned, and she's a very astute woman. She's also a retired school teacher, and her mom's was a retired nurse. And she's like, we had no idea. We had no clue whatsoever. And so it was really interesting. I mean, we knew that it hadn't been in our history books, but lots of things pass through, like community knowledge that does not necessarily make it to a history book.
Yeah.
But yeah, she had no idea either. And so, of course, if a retired school teacher doesn't know it, and we live not that, really not that far.
Correct.
So, yeah, I think it was a good idea to, just kind of refresh and post what we know, what we learned from, History Channel. And because lots of things are actually recorded and on things like the History Channel or cult history shows and programs, and maybe not as because it's not mainstreamed into public education.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of learn, even when you learn about the Holocaust in school, you learn about it, and obviously it's awful, but you learn almost a I don't want to say sanitized version, because that's not true, but obviously you don't go into the exact depth of the horrors of it, because you are talking to children, but at the same time learning about why it's wrong and how it happened. Of course, I have met people who have said, I don't remember learning about that in school. I heard about it, I just heard about it, and we talked about it a little, but we didn't really learn. I'm like, then I don't think you were paying attention in class. Like, that is actually, but my parents and grandparents never talked to me about things like the Holocaust or things like that. They occasionally, like, little things, if something came up on the news, they might make a reference and say, yeah, that really happened. That was very serious. But, and they were very pro me learning about those things. They just never sat down and explained to me, like, truly how bad it could have been. And, they never talked to me about anything like that. I don't know if your family ever sat down and had those conversations with you either.
Yeah, and I don't remember my family necessarily talking about it. Not that they wouldn't talk about it, but I do remember in those particular issues learning a little bit about that. But like with this whole Tulsa Massacre thing, I literally did not know anything about it, had never even heard about it until, and I think for a lot of people our age and even older, from just what I saw online, most people didn't know about this until HBO had the Watchmen series, and it was basically centered around the Tulsa Massacre. And that's where people kind of first learned anything about it. And then obviously, hopefully they went and did some research about it to learn, oh, what is this? Oh, this is actually real. It's not fake. It's not fiction.
Right. And then somebody on Twitter had compiled a list of massacres that just are not talked about in schools. And we went through them and we're like, well, let's try to talk about them. So we did some episodes, and, and the Tulsa Massacre was one of the, I don't want to say it's not one is not more important than the other. That just happened to be the one we were like, well, let's do this one this week. And there still are survivors of the massacre that are still alive. They are elderly now, but they are still alive and still waiting for justice. So I hope with this renewed focus and attention on it, that we can all, as as a population, like, help bring more attention to it, and something can be done. And I don't even think a formal apology was ever issued to the
Yeah,
community.
I don't think so either.
No.
Yeah. I think any of those instances always like makes me want to like research more about different things. Obviously, like PBS always has a lot of fun, interesting historical documentaries that they do each week, and so I would always tell people to go check out some of those because you do learn about things like this that aren't really in the mainstream, as far as big things that happen in American history that just kind of have been forgotten. But now we're going to go ahead and play that segment that Matt recorded where he talks about what happened in the history with the Tulsa Massacre.
So, allegedly, what happened was sometime during the day of June 31st, a black teenager, Dick Rowland, entered an elevator. In the elevator was Sarah Page. She was the elevator operator, a white woman. And at some point, she screams, and Dick Rowland runs away. The next day, he's arrested for the sexual assault of Sarah Page. So from there, he is kept at the courthouse, and a group of white people show up, armed white people, show up that night in order to, they demanded the sheriff hand over the teenager, and the sheriff refused. So his men guarded the teenager on the top floor, and they, backed down. So approximately 9 p.m. So as we move into the evening, a group of about 25 armed black men, including these were World War I veterans as well, because remember, this is 1921. They went to the courthouse to attempt to guard Rowland as well. The sheriff turned them away, and then some of the white mob attempted to break into the nearby National Guard armory. They were fortunately not successful. So now what has happened as we approach 10 p.m., this is the night of May 31st, a group of armed 75 black men returned to the courthouse at approximately 10 p.m. And, they are armed, and they are met by about 1,500 white men, some who are also armed, massively outnumbered. They retreat back to Greenwood, and then from there, all hell breaks loose. Throughout the night, groups of white men, white Tulsans, descend just on Greenwood and attack people. An unarmed man was shot in a movie theater. An unarmed black man was shot in the movie theater. Many of these the white Tulsans were deputized and given weapons by actual city officials. So sometime throughout this, there was a rumor that broke out that there was a large-scale insurrection from among the black Tulsans, and that they were receiving help and reinforcements from nearby cities and populations groups with large black populations. So it kind of fanned the flames of what was happening. So some around sunset of June 1st, this thousand-strong group of white citizens continue just flooding into the Greenwood District. And that's where the looting and the burning of homes, businesses, and it encompassed about 35 city blocks. Firefighters did arrive, and they did try to help. However, they reported later that when they testified that rioters met them with guns and forced them back and forced them to leave. So, as I mentioned earlier, it was a Red Cross estimate that stated over 1,250 houses were burned, over 200 were looted, and then again, it was 2 newspapers, a school, library, hospital, churches, hotel, stores, and then again, countless black-owned businesses that were torched and burned, destroyed, or damaged. So just before noon of June 1st, the governor at the time, who was J.B.A. Robertson, he declared martial law right before noon. So the National Guard arrives, and this effectively ends the riot. So the guardsmen arrive, they start helping to put out the fires. But throughout this, they are putting people under arrest, and many of them black Tulsans. And by June 2nd, some 6,000 people are being guarded at their local fairgrounds. So after the riot ends, the investigation starts, and then within hours, all charges against Dick Rowland were dropped. The conclusion was that very likely he had stepped on her foot or bumped into her. There was no sexual assault, and it was a 2001 State Commission examination that determined that they confirmed 36 dead, 26 black, and 10 white. But historians estimate that the death toll could have been maybe closer to 300. But it's noted that even by the estimates, the commission estimates of 36 people, it would make it the one of the deadliest riots in U.S. history. The only one ahead of that, using the number 36 at the time, would be the riots of 1863, the draft riots in New York, and that killed approximately 120 people. So if you think 1863, that would have been the Civil War. So sans the Civil War, one of the deadliest ones was a riot that was started by a claim of sexual assault against a teenager who did not sexually assault or do anything other than likely just bump into this lady. And then it resulted in the deaths of so many people and a massive amount of damage. So the front page story was removed. It was not talked about. There was nothing public about it. You know, as Cody and I have mentioned, we weren't taught this in school, and it's rarely mentioned. So now, of course, it's being talked about more, and there was a race riot commission saying that, you know, to investigate it and try to actually get more details and investigate it. Now, keep in mind, it is now 100 years later. So they are trying to look into it, find there's people buried in unmarked graves, and the 2001 report of the Race Riot Commission concluded that between 100 and 300 were killed, and more than 8,000 people were made homeless within an 18-hour span in 1921. So there was a bill to try to teach about the race riot in 2012 in Oklahoma schools about the Tulsa race riot, and it actually failed. The opponents claimed the schools were already teaching their students about the riot. So, you know, as Cody and I have talked about many times, Black history is erased from the Black narrative is completely erased from a situation, a decision, repercussions, and we see that here. The second deadliest riot we know of in history as far as riots go here, and we've not even been taught about it. And even an educational bill to make sure it's being taught, the pushback against, if the defense of the bill is, oh, we're already teaching it, then what was the harm of passing it? You know, this is problematic. And so we also know that history is typically written by the victor. So we learn that, you know, in, like, for example, in our country, white people write the narrative. And so it's common for Black history to find that Black history is routinely erased or whitewashed or painted in a completely different light. So at this point, you know, this is what we have. I'd encourage anybody to look into it more, sit down and read it for yourself. You know, on if you're watching this on YouTube, there's a graphic I sent Cody that has a map of all these massacres that were really not taught about in school. So you can take a screenshot and look them up yourself. I would really encourage anybody to do that. Go to history.com, go to websites, look them up. There's usually websites and memorials for them that do exist, even if they're not publicized, and you can learn all about them and who was affected and what happened. So I would just encourage anybody to do that.
So, hey guys, we want to remind everyone that you can keep in touch with us on all of our social media channels, whether that is Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can do all of that at the ComaCast.
And we definitely love to interact and hear from all of our listeners. All of this is not possible without you guys.